Can you tell me again, picking up from where you left off with Auschwitz?
Yeah, from Auschwitz I was transported to Wuppertal. So the group of us transported over there a few hundred to clear the rubbish or the ruins after the Allied air raids on German cities. When we arrived in the Rhineland, what they call this section of Germany, we found our camp. The camp where we were destinated was the night before destroyed by the Allies. So they sent, we have seen few of those inmates over there. They came over with some food, give us some food in those freight cars. They used to transport us, and they sent us back to, not to Auschwitz, they sent us to Camp Buchenwald, which is near Weimar, Germany. This part they call this Thüringen, and Weimar is known as the birthplace of Goethe, the most famous German poet and philosopher. The camp was like only 6 miles away from Weimar, and mostly the prisoners were working in a breaking rocks in quarries, stone quarries. That's what we were doing. Break the rocks, carry them uphill, and load it on the wagons, whatever. After a certain time, they sent me, I stayed over there for 6 weeks only. After 6 weeks, they sent a group of us to a new camp. They called it Camp D or Dora, which was satellite of Buchenwald. At this camp, there was really no camp, there was only underground tunnels which the Germans cut in a mountain range. 2 parallel tunnels connected laterally, and they were big enough to railroad cars could go through. And in those tunnels, then there was these lateral tunnels that produced the Vergeltungswaffen, what they call, or revenge rockets V1 and V2, which they were shooting against England.
Yeah.
So the flying rockets. The small rockets were not very effective because the Allies found a way to put them out of control. So the regular Spitfire used to fly alongside, and with the tip of the wings, they tipped the wing of the flying rockets, and they went out of control. Didn't go to the destination. But at the same time, they built a huge rocket, so V2. This is a prototype of the rocket they put on the moon, went on the moon. They were designed and built by Werner Braun. They started to build them in Peenemünde, next to Stettin in Polish, on Baltic Sea. But since the Allies were destroying everything over there, or they were harassing them and air attacks against this, so they transferred the factory to the underground tunnels where nobody could destroy it. It was impossible because there were tunnels in a mountain range which was about 400 feet high. So there was no way. But the Germans did this well because the tunnels were connected. They put these tunnels up, for smokestacks. They were like in the woods. But anyhow, there were about 15,000 prisoners over there working. At first, we were building those V1 rockets, and then V2 rockets, those big prototype of those they sent later on the moon. Those rockets were about 22 feet long, and there were like two tanks. One was hydrogen, one was liquid hydrogen, and there was anyway, those fuel tanks, right? And on that tip of this was a small control devices and explosives. There was not much, you know. So when they were flying against England, when they arrived to the destination, they dove down to it, and they didn't do so much destruction, but a lot of terror and noise. That's what it was. But if they will improve it a little bit better, there will be definitely big destruction. And the same rockets later on, you know, they were used to put men on the moon. Okay, so built by Werner von Braun. For this camp, I was working over the underground, and then luckily they needed some carpenters to build a camp for German civilians, German workers. So they took us out and transferred us about, we had to go to work every day, about 6 miles. And we built a camp for them, like barracks where they could live. And that was a pretty nice job.
John, what was your physical condition at this point, and what was your age?
My age was 21 in this day. This was 1943. I was born 1922, so I was 21 in December 27, 1943, and this was in this Camp D.
And your physical condition?
My physical condition, I was maybe lucky that I was well conditioned by scouting. When I was young, I was scout, you know, and learned some survival, and those survival skills helped me, you know, to eat white plants and pick up worms, or whatever, and a little bit protein to eat it. Or in one area was an old orchard, you know, so we ate the apples, okay? In a camp, everything able the stomach could digest, you were eating. There were cases also where some prisoners were eating, you know, part of bodies of deceased or died prisoners, you know, which, you know, the Germans didn't look at this with, you know, they were against this. Everybody was, because this is, they call it Scheußli.
They called it what?
Scheußli. Scheußli means it's terrible, you know, if you do this.
How do you spell it?
S-C-H-E-U-S-L-I-C-H. Scheußli.
So even though
This is, you know, like a, it was terrible, you know, to do.
even
this.
though the Germans were causing it, they were revolted
even so,
by it.
but they didn't, you know, they didn't approve it, and they didn't like this. But we had, in a history, we had situation where people were consuming each other. It was during, in America here, in the United States, when people were, those tracks going towards west, towards California, when they were stuck sometimes in a winter storm and people were dying and there was nothing to eat. They were eating. There were cases. It was not far away from, next to Rocky Mountain.
The Donner Party.
Yeah, and the Indians, they used to travel sometimes with them. You know, they wouldn't touch it. You know. And then we had a case here in the history. There was a plane crashed in the Andes for 21 days, and they decided to consume the death.
Cannibalism.
Cannibalism, yeah. We call it cannibal, but there's to survive. Yeah.
What was your reaction?
You know, ancient history, you know, once, you know, when the Israelis were surrounded by the Romans, they ate their own children, you know, when they were dead. What was my reaction? And most likely I ate it too. My friends gave this to me, I didn't ask what I eat, okay? That's very possible.
But you don't know for sure.
Not for sure. Not for sure, but I was saying, no, not knowing about this, what could happen. Because, you know, some people, especially the Russian prisoners, they didn't give a damn, you know, they ate whatever they could. Yeah.
So now you were 21, and what would your normal weight have been? What your normal weight? And I'm trying to get a sense of how underweight you were.
I was probably like, I didn't belong to the complete skinny skeletons like you see on some pictures. They call it Musulman, that the German called them, you know, Musulman. They could hardly walk, there was skin on a bone, and they were dying very quickly. I was underweight and undernourished, but I could still move, still function. My mind was clear, and somehow the skills what I burned was Boy Scouts. I could eat any fruits, any worms, any protein I could find, any bugs, because they give a lot of protein. But I never went to cannibalism, like eat somebody else's body, unless I did not knowingly. That somebody offered me some soup, you know, and just boiled in a camp, you know, and then there was. But we ate cats, dogs, with stuff like this. There was no question.
So besides building the camp for the German civilians, what else were you doing at Peenemünde?
After this, the transfer this was in Erich, near Nordhausen. That's why we're building the housing for the German civilians. And from over there, they transferred me back to the main camp, Dora main camp. And after a few weeks, we used to go by train about like 20 kilometers to a place they call it Kleinboden. And this was an old salt mine and salt buildings, you know, for the mines outside where they stored salt and so on. So they converted this in a camp. And there was already, the Allies landed already in North France, in Austria. The Germans evacuated a lot of their equipment, and they brought this by rail from France to Germany. Whatever they could, their equipment and whatever they could steal and save. Yeah. So they were using us to unload this. And I was at the unloading for a few weeks, and then somehow one of the Germans supervisors, he didn't like a group of us, sent us back to camp, you know, as a punishment. And then as a punishment, we were in a camp, and they put us to so-called cells. We were taking apart misfired rockets, V2 rockets. So we took it apart, and under the supervision of German Wehrmacht, as the regular German army soldiers, we had to take it apart and check the parts. If it was something good, put it to sides so they could be reused. And this was a job. I was doing this with few of the people, and then since I could speak German, they always used me for, you know, to write down inventories. And another guy who was taking the inventory was one of German industrialists. His name was Schank from Saarbrücken. is he was in concentration camp because he assaulted one of the German high officials. So they didn't kill him because he was very, very wealthy man, industrialist. So but they put him in a camp. He didn't have any privileges. He slept with us and everything. Ate same consumption of food. Except they didn't cut his hair because everybody else they cut his hair, but they left his hair. He survived the camp, and I've seen him after the war.
And what was his name again?
Schank, Rudolf Schank.
Schank?
Schank, S-C-H-A-N-K.
Uh-huh.
From Saarbrücken, West Germany.
And you did have seen him since the war?
Yeah, I've seen him after the war, before I came to America. Oh, he's very, very rich man, you know. He manufactures steel products, steel doors, windows, and so on.
So your work group, what ages were we talking about? All ages? I mean, young men?
In camp you have, most were younger people, you know. Old people had no chance to survive anyhow. Because we had older people, you know, and I encountered a case once, you know, one of the German guards started to hit a guy, older guy who was probably over 60, 70 maybe, and the fellow said, "I'm an older man, don't hit me." He didn't care, you know, he was hitting him, you know, but he didn't kill him, but he was hitting him. So, but those older people, they have no chance to survive.
How about did you see people worked to death from brutality from the supervision or just the starvation?
Yeah, we have every starvationist, so that they killed them on the job. There were cases where somebody couldn't get up, they put like a shovel handle over their neck, you know, and one guy has to stand on one side, on another, you know, and squash him to death, you know, choke him to death this way. So there were every day, there was some, what they called a labor detachment, what they had. Some detachment carried always dead people back to camp from outside, because this was not only for the work, but you know, beating from the SS and also for supervisors, so-called kapos. And the supervisors were mostly German criminals, and they took them, put them in a concentration camp as the supervisors. Yeah. And they were the most brutal people. Not all, but mostly.
Because many were already the criminal mind.
Yeah, that criminal mind. What is interesting is this, that, for instance, they were like very brutal in Auschwitz, is they transferred them from, that for instance, I was transferred from Auschwitz to the bombing commando, and one of those kapos was also transferred. When we arrived in Buchenwald, the internal administration, would say, was part of this, was not done by prisoners. And they were mostly German political prisoners. And one of those guys came over to us when we arrived, and he said, "Do you have any wrong or abusive kapos or foremen between you?" We're all afraid even to say something, because, you know, those guys were murderers. And he said, "Don't be afraid. This is not Auschwitz, this is Buchenwald. The internal internal administration, almost here, prisoner administration is done by political prisoners. And so don't be afraid." And they encouraged us to say, "If you know anybody, point it out, and you can do to them whatever you want." So they encouraged them to attack them, and this is what happened. Once they start attacking them, you know, they beat some to death. You know that people can be cruel in this case, and some. I seen a guy when they beat him, he ran toward the fence, dividing part of the camp, and Somehow he managed this to go over the fence, but it's wounded. He survived, but a lot of them were killed. Okay. But the same guy, later on, they put him to a hospital because he was in a bad condition. Later, they put them on the same transport with us to different camp. Camp Dora, Camp D. There was a different administration. When he arrived over there, they made him a foreman, a supervisor again. But he was more careful, not more as cruel as before.
Now, when you talk about these political prisoners, German political prisoners,
Yeah.
were they like professors or intellectuals,
Yeah.
journalists?
Most were professional, intellectual. Sometimes they express different opinion about Hitler and they put them in. And unfortunately, after so many years, I forgot some of those names. But when there was, at a certain time when there was a air raid on Buchenwald, and some Allied bombs, landed on a camp. Few people were killed, few of those prisoners. But the Germans, that's what they said, used the occasion. They said one of the famous political prisoners who was famous before Hitler came to power, that he was killed in the air raid. So they had this occasion to get rid of him.
Now, did you ever, were you ever co-housed with, or did you ever see any allies who were prisoners of war when you were in the camps, or they were in separate camps?
No, basically, if there was a Allied prisoners, yeah, I've seen some, prisoners of war. Okay, sometimes we had very slight contact with them, but they were prisoners of war. The Russian prisoners of war. A lot of them they put to concentration camp,
Yeah.
and the Germans were very cruel toward them because when there was a time when the Russians were victorious on the Eastern Front, so the Germans called the Russians and put them like on attention, and then like between two buildings, like it was empty space, put them in a circle, and they had to run in a circle, and there was big sticks, they were beating them, run, and they were hitting them. And there's some probably killed few, but most of them, they were beat them up. Okay.
Now, when you were at Auschwitz, did you ever hear of Consolidated Silesian Coal and Steel? There was a factory there that used prison labor.
Yeah. Yeah, there were so-called Buna Werke. This was in Silesia. They was run really by IG Farben. That's the biggest industrial chemical firm in Germany.
Yes.
And they were making synthetic caoutchouc, synthetic rubber, which we always love it, but this is ersatz means the garbage, but it was substitute. But now we're using this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Standard Oil had the license, and they, through one of their subsidiaries, it's a Standard Oil American company, through one of their subsidiaries licensed it to IG Farben.
Yeah.
Now, also the Silesian Coal and Steel, that was owned by Fritz Thyssen, the big steel,
Yeah, Tyson, yeah.
and Wilhelm Frick, who was at Nuremberg, but also Prescott Bush, President Bush's grandfather,
Yeah.
and Averell Harriman, who was U.S. ambassador to Russia. Now, the Germans went to went to Nuremberg, after the war, but the Americans didn't, and they got their money out. I was very astonished that here Prescott Bush's own son, George Bush, the first Bush president, was in the Air Force while his father was doing business with the Nazis. He was Fritz Thyssen's banker in New York. This is
Yeah.
The super rich, you know, they have own.
They have their own, you know,
They're above governments. You know what I mean?
no conscience, nothing. There's international, like conglomerate, you know, or international connection.
Well, you know, the psychopaths
Yeah.
have no morality.
Yeah.
You know.
And
Okay, I'm sorry.
The biggest company in Germany was IG Farben.
Yeah.
That's the biggest chemical company in the world, really.
Yeah.
And then at a certain time, the Germans offered them, you know, the concentration camp, that they can have some labor, because they needed labor. Because they said, we can supply with all the labor you want. You know. And that's why they put some of those prisoners to work in so-called Boomer camp. This was right there next to Auschwitz, only 10 miles away, where the coal mines used to be. And they are the only ones they get for lifetime reparation. The IG farm paid them only life, you know. They paid them for the work and a special compensation.
Now that was Buma.
Buma.
How do you spell that?
Buma works, B-U-M-A, works, W-O-R-K-S.
You say Buma is B or P?
B,
B is in boy.
yeah. But now this is short abbreviation to something, you know, and you know that we call this all Buma. Buma camp, Buma works. That's what it was.
Okay, so let's go back to your situation now. You were at Dora. Were you at Dora?
Yeah. From Dora, they transported me to a small camp. First, we used to go over like 20 kilometers by train, and I load the trains. They came from France, with the stuff what the Germans were stealing, you know, parts, you know, from industrial establishment, and they were unloading this outside and something, you know, they put in they had like a salt mines, you know, it was very famous because they had their chemicals and gold and jewelry or whatever. Yeah. And this was near Kleinboden was the name of this. This was all salt mine, so were big buildings, and that's where we were working, and then they used those buildings to take apart misfired flying bombs, this V1 and V2. And then we had to select the parts under the supervision of German army members. You know, they were with us, you know, watching us, you know, because we did a lot of sabotage. These were parts, you know, they were still good. We were breaking them, but didn't see close, you know, because they could not, once I bent it and broke it, they didn't know if there was any dent or not, because any dent in the walls, you know, was no good. And they were using the material, it was mostly aluminum. And aluminum in World War II was very expensive. You know, it was not as plentiful as you have today. The same as stainless steel, and aluminum was in a big demand. For building airplanes, the flying bombs, and so on. So this was my job over there. You know, first is unloading the stolen goods from France, and then they put me over there to take apart those misfired V1 or V2 bombs. And since I could speak German, or I could speak German, write German, so they put me to write down reports and write down the parts when they were taken. This was an easy job for me. Okay. And I was working with another prisoner who was a German industrialist, very super rich guy, but they put him in concentration camp because he expressed himself not very nice about the Hitler regime and offended one of the high Gauleiters. Yeah. So his name was Rudolf Schank from Saarbrücken. And he was working over there in an office. There was an office where civilian Germans were working. And they didn't work with us together, but this was one, they separated like an office on a territory adjoining to our camp. And next to where we were taking apart these misfired bombs, flying bombs, the so-called V2 rockets. And in the office there were like 2 German civilians and 2 girls, German girls or 3 girls. And so walking close to them, there's only this one German and me, so this was, the environment was good because they were nice people, basically. They couldn't say anything too much, because they couldn't associate with us, but since we were connected with the job, we give them our reports and so on. And once there was an air raid on the camp, and one of the Allied fighter planes, wanted immobilize a German steam engine which was next to our to the factory over there where I was working, and he was diving and shooting, and definitely before he immobilized this, we got like almost 2,000 shots in our building. We were all laying flat on the ground, and only one of the prisoners was wounded, and one civilian. And the civilian was a German secretary in an office, like a private office. And she was wounded and screaming. I was outside, not far away. I jumped in and I carried her out, bleeding, Usually we're never supposed to touch German civilian because this would be like a, but in this case was, the instinct of mine. So I threw it over my shoulder, and I was trained by Boy Scouts, how to first aid. They threw it over my shoulder and carried it like about 50 meters away was a heating system which was partly underground. And that's where some prisoners and few of the German civilians were hiding. And I threw her down to them, so I saved her life.
What was the closest experience you had to death?
The closest? The closest one, they evacuated us to Bergen-Belsen, because on the road over, once we came to a city they called Celle, there was, not far away was air raid, and they start to drive us first ahead, and they start to shoot in us. They were shooting, they killed quite a few. I cannot tell you how many because we're altogether 400 people. I was one of the first rows in the front. But anyhow, the guys next to me, either they picked them up or they shot them. So how did I survive? I don't know. I got only one scratch in my behind, like a flesh wound, which was not dangerous. Okay, like if it would be hit a bone, then I would be completely there. So I could make it to the camp. It was another few miles. I didn't realize where we were going. There's another few miles. This was away from Bergen-Belsen, and from there, just before liberation, I escaped. But this was only one day freedom because the Allies, the Canadians, freed the camp. So I went back to see my friends. The Germans were gone. So they left few of their guards. And one of them who was left was a guy who murdered a lot of people. We were witnesses to this. I don't know what happened to him because the Canadians put him right away to work, carry dead people. And he got some beatings from prisoners, kicking him, they cut his hair and so. He was a young fellow, but he murdered dozens of us. Okay, I was saying dozens. I want to tell you because I didn't count what I witnessed personally. was at least 10, 12, okay? But there was much, much more what he killed, you know, which I didn't see, okay? Because I was marching in the column in the front. The column was, were like 400 people, okay? And after the liberation, he was stupid enough that he didn't escape. And so immediately they put him to work, carry the dead people and so on. And the supervisor of the small camp where I was in, you know, he didn't, I seemed to kill or killed him only one prisoner. And this was like a mercy shot, because the guy was laying in a ditch. This was not from our group, from previous group who was transported over there, and was dying, you know, so he went over and killed him. But this was, he wouldn't survive anyhow. This was like mercy, it was a culinary mercy shot.
So John, what kept you going through this? What was going through your mind during all this time in these prisons and under the occupation, and what was, did you think you would ever get out?
There was always a spark of hope. And as long as you have hope, you can survive. You would have no hope at all, you don't survive. There's no way, like in everything else in life. You know, people that didn't have any hope, they were very, you know, no more active, and they didn't have any will to live. And you lose the will to live, you will sooner or later you will die, especially in the conditions where it was malnutrition, killing and beating and so on. That was the only thing what kept me alive. The hope, somehow, you know, the providence, God gave me the ability to hope that someday maybe I'll be free, you know, that I will see my family also. But I did see it. I seen only some members of my family because some died, you know.
Who died?
No, my father and mother died. I didn't see them before.
Do you know how they died?
My father was in accident. It was not in the war, you know. He was in the war, but he was only wounded once. That's all.
Oh, so he survived the war.
Yeah, he survived it.
How about your mother?
She survived the war also.
Where did they put her?
No, she was in a camp. The Germans, what they did, you could call this, relocated them, but they didn't. They kicked them out of their living quarters and put them in a camp. And then from the camp, you know, they put them in a substandard living conditions, because all the good places, like my father, you know, we had nice house and everything, you know, they used this for the Germans. Yeah.
Was your family able to reclaim its property after the
Yeah.
war? Was that a complicated process?
I don't know, because I wasn't over there.
So
They reclaimed the property. They reclaimed. But it was again, the communists came over, so they claimed, you know, the communists declared everything is up to them. So the property was practically worthless. But the only good thing was that they got their old apartment back. Like my uncle didn't get it back, my sister didn't get it back because it was destroyed or whatever. So she had to have a different place to live. And luckily my brother-in-law, he used to work before the war in city administration. He was one of higher guys, you know, so they hired him again as an expert. And because of this, they had a place to live, because after the war there was so much destruction. They did one apartment, let's say, with 2 bedrooms, they put like 3 families, you know, in one room, 1 family. It's not nice, 2 families in 1 room, because they had to rebuild it. There was so much destruction. Now some cities like Warsaw was completely destroyed. There's almost no place to live.
So did your entire family survive the war?
No, not immediate relatives, yes. but you know, like cousins also, there quite a few died, you know, 'cause